On April 16th, 2007, 23-year-old Sungwei Cho walked into his university in Blacksburg, Virginia, and killed 32 people with 2 semi-automatic pistols. He also injured 17 people who luckily managed to survive. Cho's story is, in my opinion, much more dramatic and depressing than other spree shooters such as Elliot Rodger and Adam Lanza. This shooting is also notable for its incredibly high body count. 32 confirmed kills is nothing to scoff at. That's really a lot of people. To give you an idea, here's a picture of all the people Cho killed that day. That's a lot of brutality in one place. This got me thinking. What was Cho like as a child? What could a person capable of these acts of violence be like as a child? What made Cho develop into the sociopathic murderer he became? Cho was born in 1984 in Asan, South Korea. By the time he was only 3 years old, he had already begun to showcase some problematic behavior. He would avoid all physical contact, he couldn't look people in the eyes, and he rarely spoke, even to his own parents. In fact, he didn't even look his parents in the eye if he could help it. Cho had a sister as well, but like Cho's parents, Cho rarely spoke to her either, though it was found later that he communicated with her the most. Cho emigrated with his family to Maryland when he was 8 years old, before moving to Virginia the year after. In elementary school, believe it or not, Cho wasn't bullied. In fact, he was well-liked, and was known to be well-versed in certain subjects like math. According to some articles, he was actually quite popular with girls even. This obviously would change as he entered middle and high school. Even though Cho wasn't bullied in elementary school, he'd still throw tantrums after school almost every day, stating that he didn't want to go back to school ever again. But then again, what child wants to go back to school? In 7th grade, Cho was forced to attend therapy at the recommendation of his teachers, as they recognized that something wasn't all there with him. Throughout 7th and 8th grade, Cho would draw really creepy and cryptic drawings of things like caves and tunnels during his therapy sessions, which apparently can signify depression and suicidal thoughts. I know art therapy is a real thing, but as someone who was in therapy in elementary, middle, and high school, I'm well aware of the staff members at a school overanalyzing stupid bullshit. It can be really frustrating as the patient, so I don't know how much I buy this. However, I really wish I had these drawings because they would add to this video immensely, but unfortunately, I can't find a trace of them anywhere. The reason Cho was in art therapy was because he, even in 8th grade, refused to talk to people. He would only mutter a few words every once in a while, but that was the scope of his communication abilities. Every once in a while, when Cho's therapist would explain the meaning of his art to him, Cho would actually cry. Shortly after the whole tunnel situation, Cho was made to take an IQ test, and it was found he actually had above-average intelligence. He was also diagnosed with selective mutism, which essentially inhibited his ability to speak to other people, though he could speak better and more clearly to certain people than others. In May of 1999, a month after Columbine, when Cho was finishing up the 8th grade, he wrote a paper that essentially said that he wished to recreate the Columbine shootings. The paper also expressed that he possibly had homicidal and suicidal tendencies. Keep in mind, he was 13. Cho's sister was actually immediately contacted after he read the paper, as she spoke English fluently. Cho's psychiatrist was extremely concerned about Cho's future, as Cho's sister was one of the only people that Cho regularly communicated with. Even though their conversations were short, Cho's therapist was thinking that since Cho's sister, Sung Kyung Cho, was leaving for college soon, that Cho would stop communicating with other people altogether. This theory unfortunately hit the nail on the head with a hammer. In late 1999, Cho started attending high school at Centerville High. Long story short, Cho was bullied quite heavily for his strange vocal inflection and dopey appearance. This caused him to fall further into a rabbit hole of depression and silence. Reportedly, Cho couldn't even respond in complete sentences anymore, and in fact was barely audible. He would only speak to teachers privately, and even then, all that he'd muster were quiet, nearly inaudible whispers. When Cho was forced to read in front of his class, Cho would read in a really creepy, deep, and raspy tone of voice. You can actually hear this in his manifesto.
You had 100 billion chances in the ways to have avoided today, but you decided to spill my blood. You forced me into a corner and gave me only one option.
After Cho's freshman year, he transferred to Westfield High. I bet Westfield High likes having that on their notable alumni list. Cho's grades were excellent. It was noted that he spent about 3 to 5 hours on homework every single day. He was known to hand in exceptionally well done assignments, and his relationships with his teachers were great. However, his social life and ability to make friends were non-existent. Cho was eventually put into a special needs program once the full extent of his mental disability came to light. Regardless of this, Cho maintained a GPA of 3.5. Cho also caused no issues during his stay at Westfield. In 11th grade, due to the fact that he was very nearly 18 years old, Cho stopped attending therapy and receiving mental health services. This would unfortunately lead to his downfall, as many like to say, though I honestly doubt that mental health services would have prevented the Virginia Tech massacre. In my opinion, some people are just too deep in a hole to be dug out. I guess what I'm trying to say is, Cho probably thought of his mental health services as a waste of time.
He planned this out very carefully. He's not delusional in what he did. He knew exactly what he was doing. I believe this young man probably started down a very sad path early on when he was a child. My guess is this plan had been brewing in his head for quite a long time.
Overall, Cho's early childhood and teenage years were very troubled, to say the least. So much so that some of his own family was scared of him and considered him to be a mute or severely mentally ill. Which was true, he was definitely severely mentally ill. That was just a quick introduction to Sung-Wei Cho and his early years of life. This part is the shortest part of all the parts that will be in this mini-series. I wanted to get his early life over with so we could get to the fun stuff in part 2. In the next part, we'll be taking a look at his early college years, which were when Cho's issues started to really showcase themselves. Cho stalked women multiple times, wrote cryptic messages on their dorms, took pictures of their legs without permission, and much more. So much more. It was 2003. Cho was 18 years old and about to graduate from Westfield High. Cho's family was morbidly concerned about him, as he had just recently stopped receiving mental health services, as he didn't want them anymore. His parents were also concerned about what his college years would be like, as Cho insisted on getting into Virginia Tech. Keep in mind, Virginia Tech is a huge school, and Cho's parents didn't know how Cho would blend into such an intense and large place full of diversity and people on all walks of life. These concerns make sense when you think about the fact that, well, Cho had maybe spoken a few hundred words in his entire life at that point. Cho's parents really wanted him to go to a small, nearby university, where he could maybe have a more personalized education that fit his special accommodations better. However, Cho pressed on about wanting to go to Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech doesn't require a written essay or an interview to get in. It's literally just based on your SAT scores and grades, which Cho had no issue with. In fact, it was one of the only things he actually was good at. So without really any struggle, Cho was accepted into Virginia Tech, which would prove to be a fatal mistake for the campus. Later that year, Cho started attending Virginia Tech as a business information technology major. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't trust this motherfucker with a fingernail clipper. I couldn't imagine having him make important business decisions on my business's behalf. Anyway, problems were already starting to arise. Cho had a roommate who was an avid alcoholic and was also a complete slob. I guess me and Cho wouldn't have gotten along if we were roommates then. Oh well. This caused him to request a room change, which he later received. He was moved in with some senior who was never really home, so I guess that was really sweet for Cho because he's so antisocial. According to Cho's parents, Cho was actually really respectful and never asked for money, and in fact, lived quite cheaply. He didn't really cause too many issues, in his freshman year anyway. He was known by the teachers to be a bit off, but hadn't really established himself to be the creep he later became. In Cho's sophomore year, he was convinced one morning that he had been bitten by a bunch of mice. When he visited a doctor later that day, it was found that a bunch of mites didn't actually attack him in his sleep at all, but he actually just had severe acne and was actually put on acne medication. Now, what medication exactly, I'm not sure. I can't figure out which one. However, the reason this is of note is because acne medication has possibly been linked to depression and suicidal thoughts. Considering this was in Cho's sophomore year and he committed the attack when he was 23, perhaps the medication might have helped deteriorate his already awful mental state. It's a stretch, sure, but I thought it'd be interesting to bring up. If anyone on acne medication wants to tell me in the comments section their experiences with it, that'd be very helpful to my research. During Cho's sophomore year, he began writing again, and in fact, would spend almost all of his free time writing alone. He never let his sister or family read any of his writings. Now, one could assume this was just because Cho was really shy and antisocial. However, after actually reading his scripts, I could say the reason is probably because his writing is horrible. Here's an excerpt from one of his plays. John. No, please sir, no. Casino official. Get out of here, kids, and don't come back. Brownstone. I am so sorry about those gangsters, sir. We'll beef up our security. Are you alright, sir? You won't get away with this, brownstone. You old motherfucker, motherfucker, motherfucker. I'll leave 2 of his plays in the description as links if you want to suffer through them. Just be warned, they're pretty awful. In fact, I've actually read Twilight, and I enjoyed those books tremendously more than Cho's plays. Anyway, Cho's grades were starting to slip, mainly because he took a few English and writing classes. Considering his handle on the English language is awful, it makes sense that he didn't do particularly well in these classes. In fact, his GPA fell to just under 2.32. If his writing assignments were as awful as his plays, I could definitely understand as to why his grades were slipping. On top of being diagnosed with severe acne and getting awful grades, Cho had sent a book outline to a publisher only to find it was rejected. Around this time, Cho started to build a reputation among his classmates as a creepy fucking weirdo. Usually I'm pretty empathetic to most of these shooters, as they usually were treated quite unfairly, but Cho definitely earned his reputation. One time in class, Cho was invited to come back to this girl's room. Not for sex or romantic purposes, but for studying reasons. In this girl's room, randomly without any reason whatsoever, Cho pulled out a knife and started stabbing her carpet. Those same people who tried being nice to him once also invited him out to eat quite a bit, but he never would talk and would just stare at them awkwardly as he ate, so they stopped inviting him to do stuff. I'm surprised they invited him to do anything ever. Cho's behavior was starting to get creepier and creepier. Cho started writing lyrics from Collective Soul's Shine all over his dorm walls.
Give me a word, give me a sign. Show me where to go, tell me what I will I find.
Cho also introduced himself to people as Question Mark, and sometimes Question Mark from Planet X. He also had a personal vendetta against his teachers and started bullying them by being a huge dick and showing up to class in really disruptive, weird outfits. In fact, one time he showed up to class wearing a Bedouin, which is essentially a lot like a turban. Now, I would have fucking loved to see this in real life, but unfortunately, there's no documentation showing him wearing a turban. I don't know why he thought that was a good idea or why he should do that, but he did. Another creepy thing he did is one time in a group project, I think it was a group writing project, Cho apparently wrote in protest to some of the students eating meat, and this is in quotations, there's a lot of grammatical errors, but he actually wrote it this way. You low-life barbarians make me sick to the stomach that I want to barf over my new shoes. If you despicable human beings who are all disgraces to human race keep this up, before you know it, you will turn into cannibals, eating little babies, your friends. I hope you all burn in hell for mass murdering and eating all those little animals. Cho's scary behavior actually made students stop showing up to class because everyone was scared of what act of bullying Cho was going to commence next. Now, I really don't know why he was such an asshole, but knowing that he was bullied in high school and had extremely low self-esteem, it makes sense that he might have thought that everyone was laughing at him secretly, so he acted like a huge dick to get revenge. He also wrote really disturbing shit as assignments. Now, here's the thing. I love gore, and I love violence in movies, games, comics, whatever the fuck I'm currently ingesting at the time. I like writing about those things as well. However, for me to enjoy that media, there has to be more substance than just violence. If it's a story, it has to be a good, immersive story. If it's a game, it has to have more game mechanics than just gore to get me to enjoy it. What I'm trying to say is, Cho's writings weren't tactfully disturbing or thought-provoking. They were just violent for the sake of being violent. Everything he wrote sounded like a violent fantasy. And considering how many verbal threats Cho made to people, it makes sense that people were genuinely concerned about their own well-being when even 10 feet near Cho. On top of this, many students reported that Cho would take photos of them without their permission. Not regular class photos either. Up close and personal photos of their legs, face, and all sorts of creepy shit. I'm sure the victims of Cho's surprise photography wouldn't have really cared had Cho not have been such a scary motherfucker. They were probably in fear that Cho was marking them as potential targets or something. I certainly would have thought that and would have reported him immediately. Cho also told his roommate that he had a fictional girlfriend named Jelly, and Jelly referred to Cho apparently as Spanky. Even Cho's roommate wasn't comfortable being near Cho.
I think he isolated himself so much that one day he just thought there was no way he could get rid of it, and the only way he could was from what he did.
I could definitely empathize. Could you imagine sharing a room where you sleep at night with this guy? His behavior in his dorm was pretty normal though, aside from the fact that he'd write song lyrics cryptically and obsessively all over his walls. He essentially just watched horror movies and listened to music, kept to himself mostly. I think this report is trying to insinuate that there's something wrong with heavy metal music and scary films and keeping to yourself, which in my opinion is total bullshit. The media you consume does not turn you into a violent murderer, obviously. And wanting to be alone means you just have an introverted personality. Doesn't mean you're out to shoot 40 people. I can assure you a 55-year-old woman wrote this report. Overall, if it wasn't clear by now, Cho was genuinely starting to lose his fucking marbles. And one day, he did something that genuinely made students fear for their lives around him. Remember that carpet knifing incident? Well, Cho actually went back to that same woman's room one night. That woman was 19-year-old Emily Hilscher. Cho went to her dorm's door and wrote lyrics from his favorite song cryptically all over it. That song was Surprise, Surprise. Collective Souls Shine. Now, if that wasn't creepy enough, know that Emily Hilscher was one of the first few victims to be brutally murdered in the Virginia Tech Massacre. Cho's behavior was starting to not go unnoticed. On December 12th, 2005, the Virginia Tech Police Department received multiple complaints about some of the creepy stuff Cho had been doing. His most recent stunt being vandalizing Emily Hilscher's door. Oh yeah, I got something factually wrong in the last episode. Last episode I said that Cho wrote the lyrics to Collective Souls Shine on Emily Hilscher's door. But it turns out, Cho only wrote the lyrics to that specific song on his wall. What he wrote on her door was actually far creepier. He actually quoted Romeo and Juliet. By a name, I know not how, tell thee who I am. My name, dear saint, is hateful to myself, because it is an enemy to thee. Had I it written, I would tear the word. This quote holds significance, as Cho had extremely low self-esteem and didn't like his own name at all. In fact, if you remember correctly, Cho actually introduced himself to people as ? Anyway, shortly after the police were notified of Cho's behavior, he received a visit from campus police. He was informed that he was no longer to have any contact with Emily unless he was looking for trouble. Cho actually handled it pretty well. On opposite day, right after campus police left, Cho texted his suite mate, I might as well kill myself. Cho, not being very smart, didn't think about the fact that his suite mate probably wasn't buddy-buddy with him, and most likely didn't want to make edgy jokes about suicide. In fact, his suite mate actually reported this to the police. Later that same day, those same police officers returned to Cho's room to see what his problem was. Cho was detained and sent to the Virginia Tech Police Department for an evaluation. Surprise, surprise, it was found that Cho was severely mentally ill. However, it was mistakenly determined that while Cho is mentally ill, he does not present an imminent danger to himself or others, which is very untrue. It was noted that he had access to a firearm, had been stalking people, and doing violent and incredibly disturbing things, yet for some reason he still wasn't deemed dangerous. However, he was recommended for an involuntary stay at a mental clinic. Surprise, surprise, he was discharged. A few weeks later in Cho's creative writing class, his teacher demanded that he stay after class to discuss some of his writings as they were really fucking inappropriate and weird. Here's an excerpt from one of his last creative writing pieces. It tells the story of a morning in the life of Bud, who gets out of bed unusually early, puts on his black jeans, a strappy black vest with many pockets, a black hat, and large, dark sunglasses, and a flimsy jacket. At school, he observes students strut inside smiling, laughing, embracing each other. A few eyes glance at Bud, but without the glint of recognition. I hate this. I hate all these frauds. I hate my life. This is it. This is when you damn people die with me. So, yeah, honestly, I would ask Cho to see me after class if he handed this shit in unironically. Anyway, when class was over, Cho's teacher scolded him on how disturbing his writings were and how petty his efforts were in class, before he then turned around and started walking to his personal office. Cho was very unhappy with this and actually started to follow his teacher into his office uninvited. To make things creepier, his teacher knew he was doing this and just didn't want to confront Cho about it because he was scared of him. When the teacher finally made his way into the office, Cho was just standing in the doorway, staring silently at his teacher for a few minutes until his teacher suggested that Cho drop the class, because he's too abusive and lazy to pass. Cho continued staring for a minute, until he finally started screaming at his teacher about how he didn't want to drop the class, and about how unfair his teacher was. Cho, of course, was reprimanded for his behavior, and was asked to leave and not come back until he could control himself better. This was a breaking point for Cho, and would be his last unsatisfactory experience before the attack. A few weeks later, in February of 2007, Cho ordered 2 semi-automatic pistols, waiting at least 30 days before receiving each one, as state law suggests. He would spend the next few months preparing for the massacre, stocking up on knives and ammunition, and recording manifestos that he would mail to news stations shortly before the attack.
You forced me into a corner and gave me only one option. I didn't have to do this. I could have left. I could have fled. But no, I will no longer run. If not for me, for my children.
At 5:30 in the morning, Cho gets up and brushes his teeth before arming himself and getting dressed. He leaves his dorm shortly after. 7 a.m., Emily Hilscher is dropped off by her boyfriend and goes to relax in her dorm before class. 15 minutes later, Cho, armed with a pistol, makes his way into Emily Hilscher's room as her door was unlocked. He closes the door behind him quietly, and then shoots Emily Hilscher and her roommate, point blank, killing them both instantly. As Cho's clothes were covered in blood, he made his way back to his dorm to change into clean ones. Shortly after, the police were called to Emily's room to see about noise coming from there. When officers arrived at the scene, they saw 2 dead bodies and started an immediate investigation. Around 9 a.m., Cho sends in a package containing all of his manifesto to NBC News. 40 minutes later, Cho enters Norris Hall, located inside of Virginia Tech, goes into room 206 and starts shooting. Cho shoots the professor of that class to death before killing 9 other students and wounding 3 others with minor bullet wounds. Cho peeks into room 207 and shoots the professor of that class to death. Cho then exited the classroom and made his way into room 211, which was a French class. He starts walking down rows of desks, shooting as many people as he can, point blank. At this point in time, police are already on the scene. Cho attempts to enter room 204. However, it is being barricaded and blocked by that room's professor. Said professor is shot to death through the door. Cho returned to room 206 before he then continued shooting survivors to death. At 9:51, police use a shotgun to shoot the school's door lock-off, as it automatically locked, due to the school's lockdown system. This alerts Cho to the police arriving at the scene. Seconds later, Cho turned his pistol to his own head and pulled the trigger. Cho is dead. Cho's story is one that won't be forgotten anytime soon. It's a story of somebody who victimized themselves so much they believed that they were entitled to revenge on people who had done no wrong. 32 people may have left planet Earth that day, but they will never be forgotten.
Carving at the walls and he's coming inside. I'm begging, pleading God, but there's no insight. Tell my mama it'll be alright. Such a fucking coward, I put up no fight. I wish I would have seen. No, the writing is on the wall. Carving at the walls and he's coming inside.